terms of West Ham, do you think that they will be relegated? And if so, do you think that if they do go on to be relegated, that they should keep Nuno Espírito Santo and then try and rebuild with him down in the Championship for him to come back up? Or do you think you'll end up leaving by the end of the year? What is your whole perspective on the West Ham situation, mate?
I think this is it. I'm going to use a reference that Ange said in that football podcast with Neville on that, when he said that Spurs were a strange club. I find West Ham a strange club, a curious club, as he said, weren't it? I think Ange about Spurs, but I find West Ham a curious club. I mean, if we dissect things and pull things apart, I mean, you say about that loss yesterday, 104 million, was it? Loss or something like that? Some ridiculous extortionate fee.
Yeah, it was quite a big fee, well over 100 million.
Yeah, and you just think, like, how enough does a club like that generate that amount of loss when their stadium, they've not really bought it, you could argue. So they're getting the ground on peppercorn rent, if you can call it that, if I'm allowed to say that. So there's not much that you spend out on that expenditure. Whenever they're at home, they sell out their ground. You know, you don't see really that many empty gaps. They don't really spend colossal money on transfers. So where is all that money that 104 million of a loss? Where's that gone? Karen Brady to get some more fake tan or something, I wonder. You know, it's just, it makes you question. And I think with West Ham, in that respect, they've got, again, so much potential as a club to kick on. They had that chance when they did win the Conference League. Whether you think the Conference League's a good competition for clubs like West Ham and Palace to be part of now, or you could argue it's tin pot, it's still a cup end of the day. You know, and West Ham did win that, and that was their mark to say, right, this is where we now kick on from here. Like Spurs with the Europa League season last season, a chance to kick on. I've got a lot of friends, a lot of family members that are West Ham fans. And like one of my uncles that's staunch West Ham, he's got a West Ham season ticket. And he said to me the other week, it's the first time in years I've been really worried about us getting relegated. Now, to hear that from someone on a rival side, you could argue, you're like, without, like, you know, but then on the other end, you're like, it's sad. Because with Nuno, the question is, would he want to stay at West Ham if they've made that amount of loss of income, meaning key players will have to be sold on? And then it's like a rebuild project. Would he want to manage him for Championship alone for his own CV? You know, because I think even if he kept the Forest job, he'd have kept Forest way out of that trouble. You know, I think for owner, we know can be a bit bullish and, you know, with his managers and stuff. You know, but I think this is it. It goes back to Brady, Sullivan, that group of board that models that club. They did the same with Birmingham all them years ago. So they've not had any change whatsoever. And I really do fear for West Ham that if they was to go down, who would they get in that would think, okay, I'm ready to take this on? Because it would be a brand new project. You wouldn't have Jarrod Bowen playing in the Championship, I'm sure you wouldn't. Even someone that fans have had a lot of time for in Tom Souček, would he want to stay there in Championship? Probably not. You know, Somerville too good for Championship, you could argue. So they're in a bit of a peril, and as we know, Luke, with Championship football, it's not how it used to be, where you go down, you get your parachute payments, and then it's easy to come straight back up again. Maybe that's what West Ham owners are hoping for to help with their financial situation, is that parachute payment. Who knows? But it's a difficult one, and I really do think that if West Ham was to go down, it won't be quick fix and straight back up again. I think it'll be a couple of years.
Yeah, and obviously they went down, back in the last 10 years or so, down to the Championship. They came back up. And it's certainly one where I think you make a couple of good points there, George. Are they relying upon those payments to sort out the financial situation, especially where there's always that argument from West Ham fans where the owners don't really care about the club, especially as they don't invest in the infrastructure, and it always takes that push to try and get them to invest in a player which would be good enough for the squad, and that real big financial investment where they don't always make that, and when they do, it's always seemed to be panic mode stations rather than investment and building. But in terms of the club, they brought in Lopetegui, which was an ex-Real Madrid Spain manager. They were trying to bring in some players, and then they felt that they were under pressure from the fans, and they sacked them very quickly. But it was perhaps that intention that they really wanted to push on and kick forward, because I was looking at the Premier League table last night, and I was looking at Everton, and Everton are just a club which sort of exists in the Premier League. They're just not there to kick on enough to try and get into European places, but they certainly. I know they've dabbled in relegation over the last few years, but now they got David Moyes. I think he's a good enough and experienced enough manager not to take them into a relegation battle. So now they have a good manager and they have that stability, but they're not going to be in and around relegation as long as he's in charge, right? So are they just existing in the Premier League as part of that hemisphere and having the clubs within it? Or are they a club with ambitions? And of course they're a club with ambitions. That's why they've invested in their infrastructure and new stadium. And they've been in similar situations where they've had various managers over the years, from Martinez to Koeman to then ending up with like Sam Allardyce, obviously to stabilise them. They're bringing in Frank Lampard to trying to bring David Moyes back. So they've been on that sort of similar pathway to West Ham, where West Ham have tried to kick on with Lopetegui, and then they've tried to bring in Nuno to try and stabilise, and they had Graham Potter before that. So I think they're a club which don't really know what kind of direction that they want to go in, and every time they change a manager, it's sort of changing direction in terms of how they could move. But Nuno's one of those where by appointing him, you're in a chance to try and get European playoff because of the work that he did at in Nottingham Forest last year. But he has that quality to keep teams up. We've seen that with Wolves, and we've seen that he's managed previously in the Championship. So if they had that risk and he went down, he ticks all these boxes because there's so much which Nuno has. And ideally, the first and foremost that they would have looked at is, well, he's got enough quality to keep the team up. But it's, again, what you say there, and a part of it is Nuno's ego too big to go back down to the Championship? Of course, he's managed at Spurs, and Spurs are a good Premier League club. Again, didn't have enough time there to try and have the opportunity to build and push his ideas forward. He's kept Wolves up, well liked and loved at Wolves in terms of the job that he's done there. He went out to Saudi, won the league there. I know people have their different opinions on the Saudi league, but that's still some success for him. He's still a league winning manager. He come back, did a great job with Nottingham Forest, and now it's just not working out West Ham. And again, you could make that argument for Graham Potter. Didn't work out for him either. Didn't work out for Lopetegui. So it's not just a Nuno thing. It's a series of multiple managers perhaps being undermined by the infrastructure which is there at the club, right? But has he built an ego where does he want to go back down to the Championship and rebuild, or will he resign at the end of the year? But then if he does resign, right, will that help his reputation in terms of, well, actually, would it have been better if he had stayed, or is the club gone down and now he's just walked out on the club as a result of that? And sometimes it's hard because as a manager, you want to keep your stock up as high as you can, because if you resign and then there's a new Championship, a new Premier League job which comes up next year, or one of the same sort of magnitude or level, you're certainly going to take that rather than trying to manage in the Championship. Or you bite the bullet and you go back down and you try and rebuild, build a good record, get them back up, and perhaps that could be your long-term project. So I think it's certainly going to be interesting whether they keep the players which you've mentioned, certainly whether Nuno stays at the end of the year. But do you, again, like I know you've mentioned Spurs and West Ham are very, very close in that relegation, but and I know you've talked about Nottingham Forest as well staying up. It's so tight down there at the moment. But do you think West Ham are serious relegation contenders at this point, George?
I think they're definitely in contention. Would they? I think they've. Pains me to say, but I just think they've got more quality in them to be able to stay up in this moment in time. I think Nuno's got enough fight in him as well to keep that team up. And for the squad as a whole, with like Jarrod Bowen, I mean, you can't rely on one player in a team. We know that, but he gets what West Ham model is for West Ham DNA. It does help that he's with Danny Dyer's daughter now. But so with that roots, he's sort of been embedded into that. But I think West Ham's got enough in that, and to say, I agree with everything that you say with about Nuno. I think, in a sense, if West Ham was to go down, this is going to sound really strange as well, but I suppose you could argue Nuno owes it to himself if he was to resign, because his reputation in football alone, I have to say, I think he's been one of the most unluckiest fellas in football. I mean, with Wolves, he got them to a FA Cup semi-final. With Forest, he was treated abysmally, really, in a sense of it got them European football for the first time in years. And they've just had a bit of a dip this season, and you're going to have a bit of a dip if a club like that's not been used to it for some time. Got treated unfairly at Spurs in that respect. So I think he owes it to himself to resign in that respect, because if it was to go wrong, and I don't think anyone should dismiss that because of the misfortune that he's had in that respect. So that's why I say it might sound a bit strange, and maybe thinking on it when I was speaking out loud, I don't know if I put it across right. So hopefully it comes across in the right message that I'm trying to convey. But one thing that I have to love about Nuno, wherever he's been, whatever situation, he's the most calmest manager that you can probably come across in top flight football. I mean, with West Ham, with the situation here, with the owners, with how West Ham have been, every time he gives you an interview, all right, it might be different with dressing room, but when he's with press, West Ham situation, so calm, so softly spoken. And I admire someone like Nuno because I think he has got potential. Like you said, with the Everton model, if you like, he's a fella manager that should be off that DNA within a club, if you like. He's got that potential to do well. Moyes has shown, let's face it, some people could argue he's a dinosaur in football. But actually, with what Moyes did on a shrewd budget at West Ham and at what he got them to achieve, so now at Everton, he's built on that. All right, they've had a bit of injection in cash, new stadium as well. But he's still doing a really good job at Everton. He's making them punch a bit more at their weight back to when he was in charge of Everton first time around. And another thing, it's going back to Nuno, but I was speaking to my uncle about this and said, one thing I really like what he does is that he's even though they're in a relegation dogfight, he's brought in some of youth, brought in back that West Ham DNA, building through the youth pathway. And that for many years had been somewhat thrown out for window from previous managers like Lopetegui and Pellegrini and so on and so forth. But he's brought that in with some of these players in this situation. And if it was to keep them up, that would be amazing for them players on their CV to say, I've achieved this, you know? Because, yeah, West Ham's DNA was always about the youth. It's been in their DNA for years, but it's just been neglected, really. So, yeah, I hope, put it this way, I hope West Ham can find a way, but just not at Spurs' expense.